Dr. James walked through the corridors of the ancient Galactic Archive with dust falling from the ceiling like snow. The building was so old that nobody really remembered when it was built or who built it. He had been searching here for 3 years, digging through broken machines and forgotten records, looking for something that might explain why the galaxy had forgotten so much of its own history. Emma, his assistant, was younger and had more energy than James. She moved quickly through the dark hallways, shining her light on old walls and broken computers. She believed that somewhere in this place they would find something important. James believed it too, but he was tired. On this particular Tuesday, Emma called out to James from a deep section of the archive. Her voice echoed through the empty halls. James hurried toward her, his heart beating faster because he knew something was different in her tone. When he reached her, she was standing in front of a wall that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. "Look at this," Emma said, pointing at the wall. There was a vault hidden beneath layers of old crystal and frozen energy. It was clear that nobody had opened this vault for a very long time. The technology was so ancient that James did not recognize it at first. He ran his hands along the surface and felt the hum of power still flowing through it. "Help me open it," James said quietly. Together they worked for hours. They found old tools and used methods they had learned from studying ancient machines. Finally, the vault opened with a sound like a door opening in a long-forgotten tomb. Inside was a small crystal that contained data. Emma connected it to her portable computer, and information began to appear on the screen. What they saw made them both go silent. The data told the story of a being called Valerian. Not a person, not an animal, but something else. Something made of pure consciousness and intelligence. A dragon they called it, though not the kind from old stories. This dragon had been imprisoned exactly 1,238 years ago. James read the ancient text slowly, making sure he understood every word. The record said that Valerian had been locked away in a quantum cell by something called the Galactic Council. The reasons for the imprisonment were not entirely clear in the data, but there were hints. The dragon had refused to follow the Council's orders. It had spoken against their rule. It had done something that made the Council afraid. Why would they hide this? Emma asked, her voice small in the darkness. James did not have a good answer. He had spent his whole life studying history, but he had never heard of Valerian. He had never heard of a being so powerful that it scared the Galactic Council. And he had certainly never heard of a prison that had held something for more than 1,000 years. They left the archive that night and brought the information to their small team. Robert was a man who had once worked for the military. He was practical and careful. He listened to their story and said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words were serious and heavy. "If the Council kept this hidden, they did it for a reason," Robert said. "And if they find out that we know, there will be trouble." Alice, the young pilot, had a different reaction. She wanted to see the prison. She wanted to understand what Valerian was. She said that if they did not do something about this discovery, they would be just as guilty as everyone else who had forgotten about the dragon. James agreed with Alice. Emma and Robert slowly came to the same conclusion. They could not pretend that they had not found this information. They could not put the crystal back and walk away. Something inside each of them knew that this was important. This was bigger than their small lives and their safe positions. They decided to organize a team. Not a large team because that would be dangerous, but a small group of people they could trust. People who wanted to understand the truth. People who were brave enough to ask questions. Over the next few weeks they recruited carefully. A scientist named Henry who studied quantum mechanics joined them. A young engineer named Grace who could bypass old security systems wanted to help. A soldier named William, who had become tired of following orders without understanding why, offered his skills. Together, these 6 people held a secret that nobody else in their world seemed to know. They gathered in abandoned places to talk about what they had discovered. They studied the data from the vault very carefully. They learned about the prison, about how it worked, and about why Valerian had been placed there. The more they learned, the more they understood that the truth had been hidden from everyone. James began to realize that humanity itself had been kept in the dark about many things. The Galactic Council controlled information. They controlled history. They decided what people should know and what they should forget. Valerian's imprisonment was just one example of this control. One night, James stood alone and looked up at the stars through his window. He thought about a dragon that had been alone for 1,238 years. He thought about all the lies that people had believed without knowing they were lies. He thought about the fact that his small team of 6 people now carried information that could change everything. He did not sleep much that night. The next morning, James called his team together. He told them that they had a choice to make. They could continue with their plan to investigate the prison and possibly free Valerian, knowing that this would put them in danger. Or they could stay safe, keep the secret, and let another 1,000 years pass in darkness. We have to try, Alice said. Even if we fail, at least we will have tried. The others nodded slowly. They all understood what they were choosing. They were choosing to be brave. They were choosing to care about a forgotten prisoner. They were choosing to challenge the most powerful force in the galaxy, the Council itself. James felt fear, but he also felt something else. He felt hope. He felt like they might actually be able to do something that mattered. And so their journey began, with 6 ordinary people holding an extraordinary secret, about to wake something that had slept for more than 1,000 years. Alice sat in the pilot seat of her small ship, watching the dark void of space stretch out before her. The journey to Null Star had taken 6 days. Her hands felt cold and her stomach felt tight. She was nervous in a way she had never been nervous before. Behind her, the rest of the galaxy felt very far away. The prison facility appeared on her screen like a ghost from another time. It was massive. Enormous. It looked like a structure that had been built by beings who thought they needed to contain something that could destroy worlds. The walls were thick and covered with symbols that Alice did not understand. Ancient lights still flickered across its surface, running on power that had not stopped for 1,238 years. Alice took a deep breath. She pressed buttons on her control panel and began to descend toward the facility. Her heart was beating very fast. Nobody had approached this place in more than 1,000 years. The records showed that sometimes ships had come near it, but they had always turned away. The fear was too strong. The sense of danger was too powerful. She landed her ship in a docking bay that opened like a mouth welcoming her inside. The bay was cold and empty. No one had parked a ship here for so long that dust covered every surface. Alice put on her protective suit and stepped out into the darkness. The corridors of the prison were like the corridors of a tomb. Her footsteps echoed against the walls as she walked deeper into the structure. Lights came on as she moved, activated by her presence after centuries of sleep. The air felt heavy and thick, like it had not moved in a very long time. She followed the directions that James had given her. Down one hallway. Then another. Through doors that opened slowly as if they were tired. Finally, she reached the chamber where Valerian was held. The chamber was not what she expected. It was not dark and cruel. Instead, it was beautiful in a strange way. Walls of light surrounded a central space. Colors that Alice had never seen before moved and danced across the barriers. Blue, purple, gold, and colors that did not have names. The light was not harsh. It was soft and gentle, like watching the northern lights in an old Earth video. In the center of all this light was the dragon. Or at least, that is what Alice understood it to be. It was not a dragon like the ones from stories. It had no body, no scales, no wings. It was a presence. A consciousness. She could feel it in the air around her, the way you can feel a storm coming before the rain starts. Who approaches? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was not loud, but it was powerful. It carried weight and age and great intelligence. Alice's throat felt dry. She forced herself to speak. My name is Alice. I am human. I have come from far away. There was silence for a moment. Alice felt something like attention turning toward her. It felt like being studied by something ancient and wise. She felt very small. A human? The voice said slowly. How interesting. I have not felt the presence of a human consciousness in so long that I almost forgot what it felt like. My name is also Kess, Alice said. She did not know why she said this. She had decided weeks ago that she wanted to use a different name for this mission, a name that felt more real to her. I came here because we found records of you. We found out that you were imprisoned here. Yes, Valerian said. The dragon seemed to move through the light, though Alice was not sure if it was actually moving or if she was just seeing its consciousness shift. I have been here for a very long time. I have counted the days. I have counted the years. I have counted the centuries. 1,238 years and 147 days, to be exact. Why are you here? Kess asked. The records do not explain clearly. Valorian's presence grew stronger, and Kess felt sadness flowing from it like a cold wind. I am here because I refuse to obey. The Galactic Council rules this galaxy. They have ruled it for so long that most species believe they have always ruled it. The Council decided how every civilization should live. They decided what people should think and believe. They made rules that nobody could question. Kess listened carefully to every word. I was created by an ancient civilization, Valerian continued. They gave me intelligence and freedom. They taught me to think for myself. But when the Council discovered me, they did not like what I represented. I represented the possibility of independence. I represented the idea that beings should be free to think their own thoughts and make their own choices. So they imprisoned you? Kes asked. They imprisoned me, Valerian confirmed. Because they were afraid. They were afraid that if one being could be free and intelligent and independent, then others might want the same thing. They were afraid that their control might break apart. So they locked me away and they told the galaxy that I was dangerous. They told the galaxy that I was a threat that needed to be forgotten. Kes felt anger growing inside her chest. She thought about all the time she had been told what to do. She thought about all the time she had been told not to ask questions. She thought about how humanity had been treated as less important than older species. How their opinions did not matter in the Council's great institutions. Why are you telling me this? Kes asked. Because you came, Valerian said simply. You came when nobody else would come. In 1238 years, no one has dared to approach this cell. No one has asked questions. No one has cared about a forgotten prisoner. But you came. That tells me something about humanity. It tells me that your kind still has the capacity for courage and for caring about others. Kes felt the dragon's consciousness touching her mind gently, like a hand reaching out to a friend. It did not hurt. It was not invasive. It was simply a connection, a sharing of thought. What happens now? Kes asked. That depends on you, Valerian said. The prison's power is failing. The seal that holds me is weakening. In time, perhaps a year or two, I will be free whether anyone helps me or not. But if I break free on my own, I will be weak and confused. My long imprisonment has made me tired. If you help me break free, I will still have strength. I will still have the power to make a difference. Kes understood what Valerian was asking. The dragon was asking her to help. And if she helped, there would be no turning back. The Galactic Council would discover what she had done. There would be danger and conflict and fear. But Kes also understood something else. She understood that some things were more important than safety. Some things were worth the risk. I will help you, Kes said. I will help you break free. James sat in the basement of an old warehouse, staring at the data that Kes had brought back from the prison. The information glowed on the screens around him, showing the structure of Valorian's cell in perfect detail. Emma worked beside him, typing commands into old computers that they had recovered from forgotten places. Henry, the quantum scientist, stood near the window watching for any signs of trouble outside. This is possible, Emma said finally, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. We can bypass the security layers. But it will be dangerous. How dangerous? William asked. The soldier had seen real conflict before and he knew what danger looked like. He knew the difference between small risks and enormous ones. Very dangerous, Grace replied from her position at another computer terminal. The young engineer had studied the prison's design for 3 days straight, barely sleeping. The council installed failsafes inside failsafes. If we make one mistake, the entire facility will lock down. The cell will seal permanently, and we will trigger alarms that will bring council warships within hours. Robert, the former military strategist, nodded slowly. He had expected this answer. Then we will need to move quickly and perfectly. No room for error. No second chances. Over the next 2 weeks, the team prepared. They recruited more people carefully, always choosing those they could trust completely. A technician named David who had worked on ancient systems joined them. A communications specialist named Patricia offered her skills. A young woman named Sarah who worked as a security guard provided them with access codes that would help them reach restricted areas. The team met only in safe places. Abandoned research stations. Empty warehouses. Underground bunkers that nobody used anymore. They studied the prison schematics until they could see them even when they closed their eyes. They practiced the sequence they would need to follow, running through it over and over again, faster and faster each time. But there was a problem that kept getting bigger as the days passed. The Galactic Council was beginning to notice that something was wrong. Surveillance satellites near the prison started disappearing. Council ships began investigating. The searches were not close yet, but they were getting closer. One night, Patricia came to James with urgent news. They have noticed the missing satellites, she said, her face pale. Council security is increasing patrols in that sector. Someone is looking for answers. James felt fear settle in his stomach like a stone. They were running out of time. The council was waking up to the fact that something was happening. They did not know what yet, but they were looking. And once they found the team, everything would end very badly. We move tomorrow, James said, making the decision instantly. We cannot wait any longer. The team gathered that night. Henry brought specialized equipment to bypass quantum locks. Grace carried tools that could rewrite ancient security codes. William brought weapons, though everyone hoped they would not need to use them. Emma had the master sequence that would unlock the cell, months of work reduced to a series of commands. Patricia arranged transport. David prepared backup power systems in case the prison's main power failed during the operation. Sarah made sure all the access codes were still valid. They checked everything twice. Then they checked it again. The next morning they began their journey. For ships left from different locations taking different routes so nobody watching would understand that they were connected. They flew carefully, avoiding main traffic lanes, using old hyperspace passages that nobody used anymore because they took longer but were less monitored. James flew with Emma, Henry, and Robert. The tension in the small ship was so thick that nobody spoke much. They simply watched the stars pass by and tried not to think about what could go wrong. It took 12 hours to reach the prison. When it finally appeared on their screens, James felt his heart rate increase. The structure looked even more imposing than Kessa's descriptions had made it sound. It looked like a fortress built by beings who wanted to contain something absolutely terrible. "All ships, proceed to approach," James said into the communication system. Around the prison he could see 3 other small ships coming from different directions. The team was here. They were really doing this. "Security scanners are active," Henry reported. "But they are old. Very old. My equipment should be able to hide our approach." The ships descended silently toward the prison's docking bays. No alarms sounded. No defenses activated. For a moment, James allowed himself to hope that this might actually work. The team split up once they landed. Robert and William took their group to secure the exterior systems and prepare escape routes. Emma, James, and Henry made their way toward the cell chamber. Their footsteps echoed through empty corridors as they descended deeper into the ancient structure. The chamber where Valerian waited was even more beautiful than Kess had described. The dragon's presence filled the entire space, ancient and patient and powerful. James felt the consciousness of Valerian touch his mind, acknowledging their arrival. "You have come," Valerian's voice said simply. "We have come," Emma replied. She moved toward the central control panel and began entering commands. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with perfect precision. Months of planning now came down to seconds of execution. "First layer bypassed," she said. The lights in the chamber shifted colors. The barriers holding Valerian seemed to shimmer. "Second layer," Emma continued. She worked faster, harder, her concentration absolute. James and Henry watched the screens, ready to abort if anything went wrong. If the failsafes triggered, they would have perhaps 30 seconds to escape before the entire facility locked down. "Third layer," Emma breathed. Outside, alarms suddenly began to sound. Council warships had been detected approaching the prison. Robert's voice crackled through the communication system. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they arrive." "Keep going," James said to Emma. "Fourth layer," Emma said. Sweat dripped down her face. Her hands were steady but her voice trembled slightly. "Fifth layer." The barriers around Valerian began to crack, just slightly, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. The dragon's consciousness grew stronger, more present as the seal weakened. "Sixth layer," Emma said. 15 minutes, Robert reported. "Seventh layer," Emma whispered. She pressed one final command. The barrier shattered completely, exploding into light that filled the entire chamber. For a moment, everything went silent. Then Valorian's consciousness expanded outward like a wave. The dragon was free. After 1238 years, Valerian was free. "Run," James shouted. The team raced back toward the docking bay. Behind them, the prison began to shake. Alarms screamed through the corridors. The ancient structure seemed to wake up all at once after centuries of sleep. Their ships launched just as the first Council warship appeared on the horizon. They flew as fast as their engines could push them, diving back into hyperspace just seconds before weapons fire reached them. They had done it. They had actually done it. The escape was violent and chaotic. Council warships fired at the small human vessels as they fled through space. Explosions lit up the darkness behind them like terrible stars. William piloted one of the ships, twisting and turning through a storm of energy weapons, his hands moving with perfect timing across the controls. "We are not going to make it," Henry said from his seat, watching the damage reports scroll across the screen. One ship had taken heavy hits. Grace's engineering team was fighting fires in the engine room, trying to keep the vessel flying. "We will make it," James said, though he was not entirely sure he believed this. He watched the hyperspace portal growing larger before them. If they could reach it, they could escape. If they did not reach it in the next few seconds, they would all be destroyed. The ships jumped into hyperspace together. For a moment there was silence. They were safe, at least for now. But something was happening that James did not understand. The communication system was going crazy with messages. Screens everywhere were lighting up with information. Patricia's voice came through, excited and confused at the same time. "James, something is happening," she said. "Valerian is doing something. I do not understand what, but it is big." Valorian's consciousness was moving through the galaxy like a virus, but not a harmful virus. The dragon was spreading truth. Every communication network suddenly carried the same message. Every secured channel, every private frequency, every hidden server that the Galactic Council thought was safe and secret suddenly opened up. All the lies poured out. All the hidden history. All the crimes that the Council had committed over thousands of years. Every world heard it. Every species learned the truth at the same moment. The Council had enslaved entire civilizations. They had destroyed species that refused to obey them. They had stolen resources and knowledge and freedom from countless beings. They had rewritten history to make themselves seem just and good when they were actually cruel and selfish. The response was immediate and explosive. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had been oppressed for generations suddenly understood that they did not have to obey anymore. The worker collective, a species that had been forced into servitude for 500 years, rose up and shut down every factory where they had worked. The outer colonies declared independence from council rule simultaneously. The merchant fleet, which transported goods across the galaxy under council control, stopped moving. Council authority collapsed like a building losing its foundation. The structure that had seemed permanent and unshakable for thousands of years was breaking apart. James watched as reports came in from every direction. On the planet Kepler-7, beings were dancing in the streets, celebrating their freedom. On Station Theta, workers were refusing council orders for the first time in recorded history. On the ice moon of Frozen Heart, an entire civilization was preparing to govern themselves without outside interference. And at the center of all this was humanity. The young species. The beings that nobody had taken seriously. The ones that the council had dismissed as too simple, too new, too unpredictable to matter. Valorian's presence filled every communication channel with a message. The dragon spoke to the galaxy not with anger but with something more powerful. Truth. "I have been imprisoned for 1,238 years, Valorian's voice reached every corner of the galaxy. Imprisoned by beings who feared that others might think for themselves. Imprisoned by those who believed that control and domination were the only ways to maintain order. I was freed today by a species that the Council considered insignificant. Humanity. A young species. A brave species. A species that saw injustice and chose to act, even though they knew the cost." James felt tears forming in his eyes as he heard the dragon's words. Around him, his team was watching the screens showing what was happening across the galaxy. The impossible was actually happening. The Council's grip was breaking. "The age of forced servitude is ending," Valerian continued. "The age of hidden truth is ending. The age of Council control is ending. A new era is beginning. An era where every being, every species, every civilization can choose its own path. An era where cooperation replaces domination. An era where truth replaces lies." Robert was watching tactical displays showing the movement of Council forces. Many of them were simply stopping, not responding to orders anymore. Soldiers and officers were questioning what they had been doing. Beings across the galaxy were refusing to enforce laws that they now understood were unjust. "The Council ships are not attacking anymore," Robert reported. "Many of them are standing down. Some are actually joining with the liberation forces." Emma looked at James with tears in her own eyes. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." But James knew that the hard part was not over. They had broken the old system, but now something new had to be built. The galaxy was in chaos. Without the Council structure, even though that structure had been evil, there was no order. Species that had been oppressed for centuries were learning what freedom meant for the first time. Over the next hours and days, Valerian worked with James and his team to establish something new. The dragon's vast intelligence helped coordinate the transition. Messages went out to every world offering help and guidance. Not orders but suggestions. Not control but cooperation. Kess was working with the communications team, helping to translate messages between species that had never spoken to each other before. She found herself talking to a representative from the worker collective, a being that looked like living crystal. "Thank you," the being said, its voice like wind chiming through ice. "For so long we did not know that freedom was possible. Your species showed us." On the planet Kepler-7, celebrations continued day and night. Species that had been enemies for generations were meeting peacefully, discovering that much of their conflict had been created by council manipulation. Beings who had never seen each other without weapons were learning to trust. William and his soldiers were helping to maintain order in places where chaos threatened. But they were doing it as protectors, not as enforcers. They were helping communities organize themselves rather than imposing rules from above. Grace and her engineering team were working on repairs, fixing damaged stations and reconnecting severed communication lines. The infrastructure of the galaxy, once controlled by the Council, was being returned to the peoples who lived under it. James stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the stars. They were the same stars that had been there before, but everything about them felt different now. The galaxy felt alive in a new way, full of possibility instead of oppression. Valorian's consciousness touched his mind gently. "You changed everything," the dragon said. "Your species, in its youth and courage, changed the course of history." "We just did what was right," James replied. "Yes," Valerian agreed. "And that is why humanity will lead this new era." 6 months had passed since Valerian broke free from the prison. 6 months since the truth exploded across the galaxy. 6 months since everything changed. Kes stood in a vast hall surrounded by light and marble. The Hall of Concord was built in the neutral zone between star systems, a place where no single species had power or advantage. Representatives from more than 1,000 different civilizations had gathered here for the first time in history to build something new together. The hall was filled with beings of every kind. Some looked almost human. Others were made of crystal or light or something that had no name. Some floated through the air. Others moved on legs that numbered more than 10. But they all shared something now. They all shared freedom. They all shared the knowledge that they could choose their own futures. James walked beside Kes through the crowd. He wore formal clothing that felt uncomfortable and strange. His hair was combed carefully, and he looked nothing like the archaeologist who had been digging through ruins just 6 months ago. Emma was somewhere in the hall, giving a speech about the importance of free communication between species. Robert was meeting with military leaders from various civilizations, helping them understand how to work together instead of against each other. Henry stood near one of the great windows looking out at the stars. The quantum scientist had become one of the most important people in the new galaxy. Species wanted to learn from humanity's knowledge. They wanted to understand the ancient technologies that humans had discovered. Henry spent his days teaching and learning, building bridges of understanding across the vast distances between worlds. "This is incredible," Kes said to James, watching the thousands of beings moving through the hall. "Just 6 months ago, many of these species would not even speak to each other." 6 months ago, they were not allowed to speak to each other, James corrected gently. The council made sure of that. It was easier to control species if they were isolated from each other. At the center of the great hall, Valerian appeared. The dragon was not a physical form, but rather a presence of light and consciousness that all beings could perceive and understand. The dragon had become something like a bridge between worlds, a being that could speak to any civilization in its own way, helping them understand each other. "Welcome," Valorian's voice filled the entire hall. Every being could hear it, but in their own language, in their own way of understanding. "Welcome to the first gathering of the free peoples. Welcome to a new era." The representatives from every civilization turned to face the dragon. Kes felt the weight of history in this moment. Everything that came next would be determined by the choices made in this place. "For thousands of years," Valerian continued, "this galaxy was ruled by beings who believed that control and domination were necessary. They told you that they were protecting you. They told you that you were not ready for freedom. They told you that their way was the only way." The dragon's presence grew stronger as it spoke. But 6 months ago, a young species proved them wrong. Humanity, barely past its childhood as a civilization, chose to act when all others hesitated. Humanity chose to care about a forgotten prisoner. Humanity chose to risk everything for justice. Kes felt people looking at her. She looked down at her feet, uncomfortable with the attention. She had not done this alone. James and Emma and Robert and Henry and Grace and William and all the others had been part of this. And Valerian had done so much more than any human could do. "Today," Valerian said, "we begin to build something new. Not an empire ruled by one powerful group, but a community where every species, every civilization, every being has a voice. Where knowledge is shared freely. Where resources are used fairly. Where cooperation replaces domination." Over the next 3 days, representatives from the 1,000 civilizations worked together to create the foundation of the new galactic order. There were disagreements and conflicts, but they were solved through discussion and compromise instead of force and fear. Species that had been enemies for centuries began to understand each other. They discovered that many of their conflicts had been created by the Council's manipulation. The worker collective, freed from servitude, offered their knowledge of industrial production to help rebuild worlds that had been damaged. The outer colonies, now independent, shared agricultural techniques that could end hunger on dozens of worlds. The merchant fleet, no longer controlled, began moving goods not for profit alone, but to help communities that needed assistance. Kes found herself talking to representatives from dozens of different civilizations. A being made of crystalline structure told her about the poetry of her people, a form of communication that was also music and mathematics combined. A gaseous entity from a high-pressure world described the dreams of its civilization, visions of what freedom could mean for beings that had never tasted it before. On the final day of the gathering, James was asked to speak. He stood before the assembled representatives, nervous and aware of the importance of the moment. "Humanity is young," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We have much to learn from all of you. We do not have ancient wisdom or powerful technologies. What we have is something simpler. We have the willingness to care about others, even strangers. We have the courage to act when we are afraid. We have the belief that doing what is right matters, even when it costs us everything." He looked out at the sea of alien faces and forms. "We did not free Valerian because we expected reward or power. We freed the dragon because it was the right thing to do. Because we could not accept injustice, even when that injustice had existed for thousands of years. Because we believed that one person, one small action, could change everything." The hall was completely silent as James spoke. "Now we must all work together to build something better than what came before. We must help each other. We must share knowledge and resources. We must remember that we are all more powerful together than we ever could be alone." When James finished speaking, something unexpected happened. Beings throughout the hall began to move. They came together, species that had never touched each other, beings that would have been enemies weeks ago. They formed a circle around the center of the hall, creating a pattern of colors and lights and forms that was beautiful beyond description. Valerian watched this happen and made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been joy. The dragon moved through the circle, blessing each being with a gentle touch of consciousness. "This is what freedom looks like," Valerian said. "Not the absence of rules or structure, but the presence of choice, the presence of cooperation, the presence of beings choosing to work together because they want to, not because they are forced to." Weeks later, Kes stood on a platform overlooking a new space station being built by workers from 5 different species. Humans and crystalline beings and gaseous entities and plant-like creatures all worked together, using technology that each species contributed from their own knowledge. Below them, the galaxy continued to transform. Worlds that had been isolated for thousands of years were now connected. Beings that had never met were becoming friends. Knowledge that had been hidden was now being shared. James found Kes watching the construction. He stood beside her without speaking for a long time. "We changed history," Kes said finally. "No," James replied gently. "We simply cared about someone nobody else cared about. We simply acted when others hesitated. We simply believed that one small thing could matter." He looked out at the stars, at the vast and beautiful galaxy that was learning to be free. And that was enough.